Last week we've spent some time going over some of those first century Mediterranean cultural aspects, which are important for us to keep in mind. And the hard part about it is that they're so unlike our culture that it's easy to forget it. We're not a shame, honor-based culture. We're an achievement, succeed, do your best, not fail kind of culture. And it's very different. We're not a corporate culture as they are. We're very individualistic. We present ourselves as distinct from one another, whereas in Jesus' culture and time, they presented themselves as the same. If you know my name and my parents' name and where I'm from, you basically know all you need to know about me, because I'm just like the rest of my family. This is not the way we think about each other. So that's why we take the time to go back and over it again and again. Thematically, in the 7th chapter, there were a series of short controversies about who Jesus really is, and he concludes the 7th chapter by saying, I am the light of the world. And then this is the theme that the 8th chapter now begins. This, what does it mean for Jesus to claim to be the light of the world? So today we're going to talk about that central affirmation. But as we do so, we're really talking on two different levels. First, I've said before that some people think of the gospel, well, Raymond Brown, for example, one of the best scholars on the New Testament, he believes that the I am statements of John were the basic baptismal curriculum. And as we deal with this statement, I am the light today, there is the possibility that this is the introduction to the Christian faith that emphasizes how Christianity and Judaism are at the core similar, but in their development quite unique. So that's what's going to be happening. This is the lesson where you learn the language and learn the arguments about what it means to be a Christian as opposed to what it means to be a good member of the Jewish community. So let me just give you an overview of where we're going. The first 11 verses of chapter 8 are considered to be an insertion into the flow. So we will look at that and we'll see why it's considered that way. Then we're going to unpack a lot of, similar to chapter 7, kind of a verbal contest between Jesus and, this time, some who might be supportive of him and some who are clearly opposing him. And then at the very conclusion, we'll review again Jesus' theological claims and how believing, and John never says believe in Jesus, he almost always says believe into Jesus, as if that is an introduction to a new way of life. Not just, I believe Carmen is sitting on that chair, but I believe into Carmen as my music director and I will follow her in that way. The Gospel of John 8, 1 through 11, there is the story of the woman caught in adultery. There are a few basic things that we should have in mind about first century marriage and adultery, which we may not know, and how this should be set historically. Marriage in the first century was a union of two families, not two people. So it was orchestrated by all the family members coming to an agreement that this was, and the woman was the person that bridged the two families. As the woman leaves her family and joins the groom's family, those two families are united in a new and a significant way. In terms of adultery, adultery can occur at any point that the initial agreement is made and they are betrothed to each other, which could be a period of up to 3 years if it's a very young girl that's being married. We call it an engagement, but for them, the relationship had already begun. It wasn't sealed until the actual document is signed between the two families. So it's a continuum, and there's a different kind of penalty if there's adultery before the signing of the marriage contract as opposed to after. The actual codes of adultery are written from the men's perspective. So it's if a man is caught lying with another's wife, he and she are to be executed. That's after the marriage. If a man is caught lying with a woman who is betrothed to another family, she is to be stoned. Stoning does not always result in death, but it often results in disfigurement, and you would, from that point, be an outcast woman. So those are two things about how the marriage is different. And now as we move into it, it becomes a kind of a trial, and I want you to observe that no witnesses are brought forward. Jesus at one point speaks of a sin that is an action, and this is almost the only time in the Gospel of John where sin is related to an action. Sin in John is most frequently the failure or the resistance to believe into Jesus. So this is a shift that we'll never hear again in John, but in this case, actions are important. And then finally, why is the story here? Well, it's convenient because it's a temple setting. The story's set in the temple. And maybe I should say just a little bit about what the temple courtyard was like during a feast or a festival. I can't even think of something that would be similar, except if I think back to when I was in college at UC Berkeley. It was during the free speech movement, so that on Sproul Plaza, there would be people with little portable microphones set up making speeches. There'd be one here and one there and one, there'd be maybe up to 10 people, and you would kind of move between listening to all of these and wondering who's really into this? What is this about? But that's how the temple courtyard was. Every perspective had a speaker. So the Pharisees were talking about moral religion, and the Sadducees were talking about proper interpretation of the law, and the Zealots were out there trying to get young men to join them in a kind of guerrilla warfare against Rome. And Jesus was there, and many other teachers were there as well. So you think of this really active space with lots of people talking at once. And with the crowd heckling sometimes and challenging other times, and sometimes actually signing up to go and be a guerrilla fighter. So it's not a somber, solemn environment. It's a lively place where discourse is happening and people are enjoying the kind of tug of war over ideas. So it makes sense that this woman would be brought before Jesus. And in this case, he will say, once again, you're judging by appearances. You're not using right judgment, which he had said about the man who was healed before. So I'll read 1 through 11, and then we'll stop and talk about it. Then each of them went home. While it was early, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Then early in the morning he came again to the temple. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they may have some charge to bring against him. But Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And when they kept on questioning him, they straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to cast a stone at her." And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. And when they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." So let's think about this circumstance a little bit. First of all, they bring this woman who's been, quote, caught in the act of adultery. They do not bring the man. Now that could indicate that she was betrothed and she was the only one to be punished. But if she was caught in the act, then there must have been a witness, right? Otherwise, it's caught in the suspicion of the act, right? So and to be confirmed, there's got to be 2 witnesses. That's how the Jewish law works. So there's no witnesses, they've just brought it. So clearly, they're not interested in judging her per se. What they're really interested in is judging Jesus' interpretation of the Deuteronomic law, of Moses' law. Evidently, at that period of time, stoning was relatively infrequent. And quite frankly, if a woman were indeed caught in adultery, that would have been worked out between the 2 families. They wouldn't have needed to go to a judge of any sort. They would have dealt with it, and probably they would have dealt with it by refusing to allow this woman to marry their son and break the ties between the 2 families. So that's the first anomaly that they did not bring any witnesses. So we know it's really not about the woman. It's about something else. Jesus does something very unusual when they ask him what you have to say to that, and he knows that they're trying to test him. He squats down and begins to write in the sand. Now, I didn't know this, but one of the Middle Eastern authority on behavior, cultural behavior, suggested that this was roughly equivalent to us folding our arms and just stopping speaking. You know, like, I'm not going to engage with you. Thank you, Lauren. I'm not going to engage with you. I'm going to close my mouth and you can say whatever you want. So that's what the action of lowering yourself to the ground means. You can fight up here. I'm out of it. So finally, he stands up and he does pronounce a statement, and this is where he uses sin as an action. Any one of you having committed a sin, you be the first to have, with no sin to confess, you be the first to throw the stones. And now remember, it's a shame-based culture, right? I don't want anybody to know that I actually have sinned. So I'm not about to bend down and pick up a stone. The other unlikely thing is that stoning would not have happened in the temple courtyard. You would have to go outside of the temple courtyard to do this action. So not only would you have to pick up a stone, you'd have to escort the woman someplace else. None of the elders are going to do that. So they just flow back into the crowd, and then the crowd eventually disperses, and so now there's Jesus again writing in the sand, and he stands up and he says to the woman, okay, where are your accusers? You know, who's here to condemn you? And she says, there is no one. And then she goes away, and Jesus says to her the same thing that he said to the man who had been healed in the pool: make certain you sin no more. In other words, do not squander this second chance that you've been given. Whether it came to you as a gift of grace, or it came to you as the community realizing they're wrong towards you. So now let's take a look. The background for 12 through 30 is really two encounters, each beginning with, and Jesus said to them, again, Jesus said to them. And although that's a literary device, it could be indicating that just as the Sermon on the Mount is a collection of the sayings of Jesus and put together as if it were one long sermon, this could be a collection of several days worth of conversations with opponents in the temple courtyard. So that what we have is a contrived scene or presentation that summarizes what's been going on. But it will have two, and again, Jesus said to them, he'll use his light, I am the light of the word imagery again, and remember, oh, I did not tell you this. The festival has two final days. So the first final day is day 6, I think. And it's when they do the procession with the burning big torches that were made out of the priests' old robes. And it is the high point of the celebration. So imagine the darkness, and then imagine the whole courtyard filled with candles and these brightly burning torches, huge, huge torches. Maybe 2 Levites had to carry one at a time. And so the whole high point of the festival is that, to be in that, bathed in this light, and just, you know, it's an emotional and a visual experience. And then the next day is the day of joy that follows and allows you to reflect on and savor that light from the night before. So this is the next day. And the next day, it is intended to be a joyful day, but here we have the Pharisees trying to, quote, catch Jesus. So I'm going to read 12 through 30. It's long, but I'll try to make it so that you know which side of the conversation you're hearing. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, you're testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid because I know where I've come from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid. For it is not I alone who judges, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf. Then they said to him, Where is your Father? And Jesus answered, You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. Now he spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him, because his hour had not come. Again he said to them, I'm going away. You will search for me, but you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. Then the Jews says, Is he going to kill himself? Is that what he means by saying, Where I'm going, you cannot come? And he said to them, You are from below. I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins, for you will die in your sins unless you believe I am he. They said to him, Who are you? And Jesus said to them, Why do I speak to you at all? Let me just give you a better translation for his response. His response literally is, I am the one I've been telling you about. So all that I've already said, that's who I am. 26. I have much to say to you and much to condemn, but the one who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him. They did not understand that he was speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said, When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am he, and that I am doing nothing on my own, but I speak these things as the Father instructed me. And the one who is sent is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what is pleasing to him. And as he was saying these things, many believed in him. I think what's really going on in here is this staying on the worldly level and not allowing what they know about God to penetrate that worldly level. Now, as we go along, that's going to become even clearer. So let's go to 48 through to the end. There's been a middle discussion here where Jesus, as they've confronted him as both a Samaritan, no, they haven't done that yet, as a devil, and they've had this long discussion about, we're sons of Abraham, therefore we're good. And Jesus essentially says, you're not showing your true sonhood by the way that you behave, because you want to kill me. That's the underlying tension here. So starting at 48, I'm going to read from 48 and to the end. We were skipping the middle section. The Jews answered him, Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, remember that's the amen, amen, pay attention. I'm about to say something important. Very truly, I tell you, whoever keeps my word will never see death. The Jews said to him, Now we know you have a demon. Abraham died, and so did the prophets, and yet you say, whoever keeps my word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? The prophets also died. Who do you claim to be? Jesus answered, If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, he of whom you said, He is our God, though you do not know him. But I know him, And if I would say that I do not know him, then I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you're not even 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? And Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Now, up to this point, the Jews had kind of been doing this little dance of name calling. And now they come out with it, you're a Samaritan. If you think about it, the disjointedness between Judaism and Samaria was very similar to the disjointedness between Christians and Jews. The Samaritans had stayed in Israel during the exile. They had set up their own worship system so that they could continue the worship of Yahweh. When the Jews came back to Jerusalem, they insisted that the Samaritans stop their worship practices, which, by now had been going on for 60, 70, 80 years, and revert to their practices. And they wouldn't do it. The difference between the Christians and the Samaritans, probably the strongest difference, is that the Samaritans and the Jews were physically violent towards one another. In the Christian context, the Jews were, how to describe it? They were violent towards the Christians because they informed Rome. And the violence came through Rome, but inspired through Judaism. And the Christians did not resist. There was no pushback from the Christians. They either left or they took the violence. That was the biggest thing. Christians in the 1st through the 5th century were pacifists. They did not engage in anything any activity that would kill another. So that's the big difference between the Samaritans and Christians. But generally speaking, the Samaritans were saying, we found a good way to worship our God. And the Christians were saying something similar. We have found in Jesus the fulfillment of all we had hoped for as Jews. And again, Jesus is absolutely firm that how you treat me reflects on your relationship with God. How you treat me reflects on your relationship with God. The Jews try to corner him again, and he just says, if I denied any of this, then I would in truth be a liar. And I'd be just like you. But God will, I'm not seeking my own glory, but God will glorify me, because that's God's intention before it. And then this final thing that flips you all the way back to chapter 1. He says, before Abraham, I am. And so he is just making the strongest claim thus far in the Gospel of John, that before anything else, he was and is and will be God, Jesus,